Now, the greatest radio shows of all time.
Suspense.
The Shadow Node.
Washington calling David Harding, counter-spy.
Classic radio theater.
The Great Gildersleeve.
Fibber McGee and Molly.
Dragnet. Gunsmoke.
The Lone Ranger.
Now, step back into our time machine with your host, Wyatt Cox.
Good evening, friends of the Inner Sanctum.
Larry Thor stars in an episode of the Elliott Lewis-produced Broadway-is-my-beat from 69 years ago, November 4th, 1953, the Paul Holland Murder Case. And we thank you for tuning in on this TGI Friday edition, 4th day of November, 308th day of the year, and we have 57 days remaining until we get to 2023. Erie Canal completed on this date in 1825, with Governor DeWitt Clinton performing the Wedding of the Waters ceremony in New York Harbor. In Egypt on this date in 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter and his men found the entrance to King Tut's tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Nellie Taylor Ross of Wyoming, elected on this date in 1924 as the first female governor in the United States. Government established the National Security Agency on this date in 1952. Now, in the November 4th, 1970 edition of Variety magazine, Walter Cronkite admitted he was a liberal, But
we are professional journalists. This is the difference. We are trying to reach an objective state. We're trying to be objective. We have been taught from the day we went to school, when we began to know we wanted to be journalists, integrity, truth, honesty, and this attempt to be objective. We try to present the news as objectively as possible, whether we like it or don't like it.
Now, Cronkite made those remarks almost a year earlier on CBS, defending the network against charges of liberal bias by then Vice President Spiro Agnew. In 1970, on this date, the U.S. turned control of the Bien Thun Air Base in the Mekong Delta over to the South Vietnamese people. In 1979, Iranian people, mostly students, invaded the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 90 hostages, 53 of whom were Americans.
Inside the U.S. Embassy compound, looking out now at a floodlit scene as night falls here in Tehran of a huge anti-American demonstration just outside the gate. These grounds are occupied by about 500 students who have taken over the embassy and taken the Americans who had staffed this embassy and made them virtual prisoner. They're being held hostage somewhere on the grounds. We don't know exactly where.
Now, President Carter was outraged.
We have done nothing for which any American need apologize. The actions of Iranian leaders and the radicals who invaded our embassy were completely unjustified. They and all others must know that the United States of America will not yield to international terrorism or to blackmail.
The hostages were held for 444 days, only released as President Reagan was being inaugurated in 1981. Speaking of that time, Ronald Reagan on this date in 1980, elected to his first term as president.
All I can say to all of you is thank you, and thank you for more than just George Bush and myself. Thank you, because if the trend continues, we may very well control one house of the Congress for the first time in a quarter of a century.
Reagan not only defeated an incumbent Democrat, Jimmy Carter, also the challenge of a liberal Republican independent, John Anderson. Reagan took 44 states, nearly 51% of the vote. Carter, 6 states in the District of Columbia, and 41% of the vote. Anderson took 6.5% of the vote. And as Reagan said, Republicans won control of the U.S. Senate for the first time since 1955. In 1986, Chief Justice Rose Byrd and 2 colleagues removed by the electorate from the Supreme Court of California on this date in 1986 for their opposition to capital punishment. In 1994, the first conference that focused exclusively on the subject of the commercial potential of the World Wide Web in San Francisco in 1994. In 2003, the most powerful solar flare as observed by satellite instrumentation recorded. The first African-American president elected on this date in 2008.
Out of many, we are one. That while we breathe, we hope. And where we are met with cynicism and doubt, and those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you. And may God bless the United States of America.
Barack Obama, the first African-American ever to be elected president of the United States. Joe Biden, the first Roman Catholic ever to serve as vice president. Interesting that Joe Biden now president and Barack Obama out on the stump for a number of Democrat candidates during this off-term election. Passing away on this date, composer Felix Mendelssohn, actress Dominique Dunn, Israeli Prime Minister and Nobel Prize recipient Yitzhak Rabin, assassinated on this date. Also dying on this date, Michael Crichton, the author. And did you ever wonder about Andy Rooney? He passed away on this date in 2011. Among those born on this date but no longer with us, humorist Will Rogers, actor Gig Young, Walter Cronkite, born on this date, the very, very funny Art Carney, actor Cameron Mitchell, actor Martin Balsam, from Everybody Loves Raymond, Doris Roberts, and from Night Court, Marky Post. Among those still with us, Loretta Swit, Hot Lips Houlihan from the TV series MASH, 85 years old. First Lady Laura Bush, 76. The D-list comedian who basically shot herself in the foot when it came to her career, Kathy Griffin, 62. Karate Kid's Ralph Macchio is 61, as is Survivor host Jeff Probst. Rapper Sean Diddy Combs is 53, as is actor Matthew McConaughey. Those of you, the people who celebrate this 4th day of November as their birthday, and if this is your birthday...
Hi, we're the 4 freshmen, and we just want to say, Happy birthday to you!
And from 69 years ago, November 4th, 1953, Larry Thor, Broadway is My Beat. On this Friday, Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox on your favorite radio station. Thanks for tuning in to Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. Now, Broadway is My Beat, starring Larry Thor, as it was originally broadcast on Wednesday, November 4th, 1953, 69 years ago today.
Broadway's My Beat, from Times Square to Columbus Circle, the gaudiest, the most violent, the lonesomest mile in the world.
Broadway's My Beat, transcribed with Larry Thor as Detective Danny Clover.
It's October's passing on Broadway, the time that drifts down into winter. And now there's the wind, the searching wind, the one that puffs around corners and gathers itself into squalls, rushes into doorways and down alleys looking for what the world has left behind. And it fingers its way against the buildings, drifts again, wraps newspapers around hurrying feet, and collars are turned up against it, and the season for stray hats spinning across Times Square is at hand. Autumn song, wind and beauty on a Manhattan corner. It's yours. And where I was, a Detective Muggavan, ground floor apartment on 9th Avenue, the wind had spilled in from the street, through open door and window, had spilled in, had carried away death, had caused a flurry.
And this is what big men like you do for a living.
Sometimes bigger fellas than us. Why don't you just try to take it easy, Mrs. Holland? Just lie there.
Take it easy.
That's right.
Want to run it down for me, Muggavan?
Sure. An old story. Lady stuck her head in the oven. Didn't you, lady?
Got a suggestion for you.
Or did someone beat you up and put your head in the oven for you?
Suggestion's got your head in it. And the oven. And the gas.
How'd you get these bruises, Mrs. Holland?
Oh,
Someone tried to kill you, like Detective Muggavan said? Or did you try to kill yourself? Okay, Muggavan.
Well, lady across the hall came banging on the door to return a pot.
Kept banging, knew Mrs. Holland was home. Put her eye to the keyhole, smelled gas, her nose not being far away.
How'd you get in?
A little fellow lives upstairs, couldn't kick in the door, so he took it off the hinges. Lady across the hall got the fire department, called us. Little fellow upstairs put the door back on the hinges. You try to kill yourself, lady?
In France, they say, "Ça n'allait mort." Among other things, that's the very words they use when wishing that one should drop dead.
Now think of the advantages you've had, lady. All this education and all, someone comes along and bruises you up and turns on the gas. Who did all that?
The gist of the conversation is you should drop...
Who let you in, mister?
Ruth.
Who are you?
The cop outside said to go in. Ruth, you
Hi,
have...
Glenn. Hi. Hi-ho, and a big locomotive.
Why did the officer tell you to come in here?
Ruth,
you... Come on. Who are you, mister? Glenn who?
Gilbert. Glenn Gilbert.
With a great big firecracker for Glenn Gilbert. Remember, sweetie?
Where's your husband? Why isn't he here?
Remember, sweetie?
This husband business is another one she won't answer, Danny.
Sweetie. Sweetie, Glenn.
Doctors?
Come and gone.
Will you listen to me?
What?
Don't worry about anything.
What would he have to worry about?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Attaboy.
You're okay then, huh?
Attaboy.
You ready, Mr. Gilbert?
What for?
Talk.
What for?
You're a real doll, aren't you, Mr. Gilbert?
What do you mean, talk? What do you want me to talk for?
As far as we know, this has been attempted murder.
You attempt anything like that, Mr. Gilbert?
Glenn.
What?
I'm okay.
You're sure now?
I'm okay. Just tell them...
I know what to tell them. Which one of you? Come on.
Stay here with her, Myron.
Mm-hmm.
Outside, you don't mind, do you?
Don't like always, huh?
I'm not dressed for it.
Yeah. Okay. Outside.
Listen.
Yeah?
I don't want to be a snob. I just don't like hallways. They're cheapening. Know what I mean? No? Doesn't matter. Listen, Ruth and I went to college together. All that college talk in there, boola stuff, the locomotive.
Okay. You went to college together. Now she's married and...
And I break in very concerned.
That's right.
We went to college together. Convertibles, frats, sororities, smart places to hide the cribs, all the rah-rah things. Boyfriend, girlfriend.
You're going to get married?
Let me tell you something.
Okay. A cigarette? Light? Let you tell me what?
She's not that dame you saw in that crummy apartment.
Oh?
Cashmere sweaters and tweed skirts and the fanciest gowns on the campus. That used to be Ruthie. Not that dame you saw in that crummy apartment.
What happened?
She married a bum.
Oh, you know him?
I just heard.
And what are you doing here?
I'm up from Pittsburgh. Make my home there now. Yesterday I looked up Ruth. We spent an hour or so remembering.
That's not the question. I asked you what you're doing here tonight.
I am going back to Pittsburgh. That's all.
And you dropped in to say goodbye.
That's all.
All right, let's go back. What did Mrs. Holland mean when she said you'd nothing to worry about?
How do I know?
Kill yourself.
I didn't say that.
Close the door, will you? Oh, hello, Danny.
Who's this?
Look, Buster.
You drifted in while you were outside.
Look, Buster.
Yeah?
You sober, Paul?
Sure I'm sober.
Gentlemen, this is my sober husband, Paul.
Muggerman.
Yeah?
Get Mr. Gilbert's address, huh?
Ruxton Plaza.
Mm-hmm. Out-of-towner?
I told your friend.
Don't go back to Pittsburgh, Mr. Gilbert. Stick around your hotel.
Good night, Mr. Gilbert.
Okay. Look, now, what is this?
My sober husband. Husband,
I'll handle it, honey.
how'd your deal make out, honey? Honey, how'd your deal make out? I'm interested in knowing. Tres, muy, mucho.
I've been getting that foreign talk, Danny. Hey, tell Lieutenant what you told me in Spanish, Mrs. Holland.
Husband, honey, the deal
Oh,
fell through, huh?
well, you see...
Oh, that Officer Adler. He's a good man to leave on the door, isn't he, Danny? Let's everybody...
Open it.
Just tell me one thing, that's all I want to know.
Ma'am?
Ruth, are you all right? That's all I want to know.
There have been days, boys, but this is the day. Hi, Mom.
Are you all right?
Mom, I want you to meet my husband. Paul, this is your new mother, Mrs. Stella Wallace. As a ma, you've had her for 6 years, Paul, but you've never met her before, and... Well, there she is.
Hi.
Say hello to your son-in-law, Ma. And tell us how come you're here.
At one time or another, you must have told one of your neighbors who you were. Who you used to be. I got a phone call.
And you came running?
What happened?
What difference does it make? 6 years.
We don't know whether your
and
daughter
finally...
tried to commit suicide or someone tried to murder her. You're not paying attention.
Police is just what we don't need. Myron. Listen, Myron, get down here. My daughter's in trouble. Yes, my daughter. Trouble a big lawyer like you can earn his retainer on. Now get down here. 1212 9th Avenue. Right away, Myron. No talk.
And Mrs. Wallace took over.
Dr. Bigley, this is Stella Wallace, and don't ask me any questions. Just write down 1212 9th Avenue and get down here right away.
Doctors and lawyers, and names prominent on rosters of people to know. And in a little while, the filled room and instructions received that Ruth Holland was released in the custody of her mother, very socially and civically prominent, pending further questioning. So leave there, home now, and sleep, and be glad. And the alarm clock always rings 2 minutes of the dream. A new day, and headquarters, office, detail, routine. New day becomes half a day old, grows older, is late afternoon, then evening, and detail keeps you past then, is after 10.
Danny?
Come on in. Sit down.
Yeah. Going home soon?
Soon.
You know what I think?
About what?
About yesterday, about Ruth Holland.
Huh?
You know what I think? I think somebody laced her up good in a bar brawl. Her husband, Paul, maybe. She went home, tried to kill herself. Loaded, probably. That's what I think. What do you think?
I think I'd like to talk to her. I think as soon as the court order says so.
I'll get it. Lieutenant Clover's office, Detective Mugman speaking. Yeah? Who? I'll say that again. Yeah. Okay. Danny?
What's the matter?
I told you what I think. Now tell me what you think.
I said, what's the matter?
Homicide in Central Park, Paul Holland.
What?
Paul Holland. Found shot to death in Central Park. Murdered, Danny. Now you know what's the matter.
The light of the morning touches Broadway's shoulder softly and with chill, breaks the clinch that held it together in the night. And this is the waking and the wonder, the search and category of night memories. Time to rise, to shine, to pace the chill room, to hold the head in the hands. And morning mist to dissolve the stains of autumn nighttime. And from a place from across the river, the last cry of night, first shriek of morning, claw of whistle, percussion of bell, steel hammer electrically tripped, a million clocks sounding the alarm. So kick the regret into a corner and turn out the lights. A new day has dawned. And at headquarters from Sergeant Gino Tartaglia, the greeting.
Good morning, Danny.
And the offering.
A pot java, Danny, from the commissary. A paper cup. A wooden spoon. One lump or two.
Well, I'll do it myself, Gino, thanks.
No trouble, gladly.
Gino,
Very well. In one of these mornings, I'm going to say a thing or two to that Officer Kobransky. The remarks he passes.
Oh? Officer Kobransky passes remarks?
Just because I insist the pot java for Danny Clover be fresh and to a boil, and if he don't mind, I'll wait, thank you. Kobransky comes up with witticisms.
Oh.
On second thought, I think my strategy with Officer Kobransky should be to ignore.
I would if I were you, Gino.
Thank you. That Kobransky needs a lesson. In the words of my uncle on Mrs. T's side, Uncle Bernard, a tight lip is worth two and...
Gino, you got something for me?
No. Simply to keep you company.
You're sure? Nothing on Ruth Holland, for instance?
Simply a verbal report from Detective Muggavan on the phone, which I thought could wait until after you...
Tell me now, Gino.
Simply that Detective Muggavan early this morning went to where Ruth Holland is now with her mother to question her about her husband's murder. And there was met at mother's door by a battery of high-type lawyer fellas who turned the cold shoulder on him.
You didn't get to talk to her?
He was told Ruth Holland was in a state of shock from the news of her husband's death, that she was under a doctor's care, and they would inform us when she could be talked to, in their opinion.
Anything else?
Anything else is, one of the lawyers imported overnight for the occasion from Philadelphia said to Detective Muggavan, "You want to bring charges against Ruth Holland? Bring charges. Otherwise, don't come to the front doors. There is a sign which says, 'No peddlers allowed.'" I thought since Detective Muggavan got nowhere, Danny, his report could wait until... I'm sorry, Danny.
Forget it, Gino. The bowed shoulders, the slow walk, the sorrows of Gino Tartaglia.
It's rough. November 4th, 1953. Larry Thor, Broadway is My Beat on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. The news from 69 years ago today follows this. Thank you for tuning in to Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox here on your favorite radio station. We're listening to an episode of Broadway is My Beat starring Larry Thor, as it was originally broadcast Wednesday, November 4th, 1953. In the newspapers of that Wednesday, 69 years ago, these were some of the headlines. Democrat Robert B. Minor, a 45-year-old country lawyer, won the governor's seat in normally Republican New Jersey last night. Republican Paul L. Trost, who won the White House endorsement in the bitter campaign, all but conceded defeat to Minor at 10:15 last night. Meanwhile, Thomas B. Stanley, running on the power and prestige of the Democrat organization of Senator Harry F. Byrd, elected governor last night over Republican Ted Dalton. And Robert F. Wagner elected mayor of New York yesterday in the biggest Democrat citywide landslide in 8 years. His victory had been widely forecast. Republican Pratt C. Remmel last night won his second term as mayor of Little Rock, Arkansas, by defeating Democrat Aubrey Kerr. Russia yesterday rebuffed a Western bid for a Big Four foreign ministers meeting on Germany's future and renewed its demand that Red China be brought into the World Council of the Great Powers in a belated response to a proposal that the Big Four foreign ministers meet at Lugano, Switzerland next Monday. Russia told the U.S., Britain, and France that a conference should be held in two parts, a general session on world tensions, including Red China, and a session on Germany. Defense Secretary Charles E. Wilson and Secretary of State John Foster Dulles said yesterday the U.S. does not plan to store atomic weapons at its new bases in Spain. Wilson said statements of top Air Force officials about storing bombs at Spanish bases were made without being cleared by the government. Dulles said flatly that we have no plans for storing atomic weapons in Spain, and Wilson placed himself completely in line with that statement. Prime Minister Winston Churchill yesterday declared the danger of war has lessened because now the Russians, along with the rest of mankind, fear the annihilation an atomic conflict would bring. In an optimistic review of foreign affairs, the Prime Minister told the House of Commons he believed the Russian people and their leaders have lost their stomach for aggression. A 17-year-old high school girl, a forbidden wedding band on her finger, and a boy she wanted desperately to marry were found shot to death yesterday in Port Jervis, New York, in an apparent murder-suicide pact. Beside the body, still in a final embrace, was a penciled suicide note signed by both that asked their parents, "How do you feel now?" Police said the note indicated the girl was pregnant. A police captain who fired about 50 shots at fellow officers in a 7-hour melee Monday was brooding because he had not been promoted to assistant chief. That according to Captain E.M. Blunt of the East Point, Georgia Police. Captain Thomas A. Andrews, veteran officer on the East Point Police Force, apparently went berserk, threatened his wife, and barricaded himself in his home when officers were called. And Marie Dion, smallest of the famous quintuplets, bid a tearful goodbye to her mother and sisters yesterday and entered one of the most sheltered religious orders of the Catholic Church. Nuns of the Sisters of the Holy Sacrament formed a double row in the cloistered small reception hall to welcome the 19-year-old postulant to a life of prayer. And the New York Post said yesterday CBS was being flooded with letters from radio television fans condemning Arthur Godfrey for firing Julius LaRosa. The Post said there had been a Niagara of letters critical of Godfrey, with only the merest trickle of support for the big boss of the TV and radio show. Well, Godfrey made this indirect reference on the air firing of La Rosa, saying, "The scientist tells us that the platypus is the only mammal that lays an egg. But those of you who tune in this show know that isn't true." And those some of the day's top news stories as reported in the newspapers of Wednesday, November 4th, 1953. On your radio, Broadway is my beat. Larry Thor. The conclusion comes up following these messages on this Friday edition of Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox on your favorite station. Saturday on Classic Radio Theater, a two-part episode, first part of Escape. That'll be coming up tomorrow on Classic Radio Theater, November 5th, 1950. John Dehner starring as Isherwood in Earth Abides, a magnificent story about the end of the Age of Man and the beginning of the Age of the Rat. That'll be coming up on Saturday's Classic Radio Theater. I adore the story because it very likely could happen. Now, the conclusion of Broadway is My Beat starring Larry Thor, 69 years ago, November 4th, 1953.
And in a little while, get up, go to his desk, pat his back, reassure him that he had not been remiss in the matter of the report of Detective Muggavan, that you understood that what he could do for you now was order a squad car, which put the marvelous world of Sergeant Gino Tartaglia back together again. Legwork now. Inquiry into the life and times of Ruth Holland, who had been near death, who was a new widow, whose grief was now in the care and custody of mother, whose shock was being handled by lawyers. Inquiry to be made of neighbors. Woman, for instance, who had been a girl when Ruth's mother was a girl, and shared governesses and French tutors and girlish confidences with her. And later, notes on the care and feeding and behavior of husbands. And later, notes on the care and feeding and behavior of daughters. Woman whose own daughter was exemplary from the year one, and had only a shrug and a meaningful smile for mothers who let a silly daughter get out of hand. Inquiry of neighbor, a young chap in tattersall vest and tasseled shoes who had gone to school with Ruth Holland, and to football games, and to squash tournaments, and to Harlem places, and it was a real shame about Ruth. A girl who could have married in grade and station, and all this sordid stuff would never have happened. However, he knew well a girlfriend of Ruth's, and he had her phone number, and only too pleased to pass it on. An inquiry, then, of girlfriend of Ruth Holland.
Discreet will be our code word. Mr. Clover?
Oh, tell me about her any way you want, Miss Rundle. Just
discreetly, then. It's the code word I've lived by all my life, and it's paid off.
Oh, look,
You'd be surprised. A girl shows a little restraint, the correct choice of phrase. My, the prize showered down upon her.
About Ruth Holland.
Girl who tried to kill herself. Girl with dead husband. Girl with forgiving mom. Unhappy girl. I must remember to call the unhappy girl, or send a happiness basket, or what does one send a girl who has everything? Do you know, Mr. Clover?
You don't like her, is that it?
Let's put it another way. Let's put it... Well, you're talking to a girl who doesn't mess around with the customs of the tribe.
What are you talking about?
The tribe, Mr. Clover. Ruth's. Mine. It's got ritual in it, and voodoos, and blood ceremonies, and money, and... Well, Ruth flipped, that's all. She broke with tribal custom. Got herself into the category untouchable.
How?
Strayed from the herd one night, prayed at the moon, ended up marrying what is known in our corner of the jungle as a rotter, which, according to our rule book, unleashes a chain of events as follows.
Go on, Miss Rundle.
Well, as follows. Mom disowns of her own flesh and blood. A few Tiffany-type cauldrons are boiled. Curses are hurled into the night, and a new untouchable goes the way of all untouchables.
Which is what, Miss Rundle?
The rule book reads, marry a rotter, live the rotter's life, pay his way, do the rotter's bidding.
Which was what, Miss Rundle?
I told you. Me and discreet. Close. Like that.
Then, Ruth and her husband...
Me and discreet. Like that.
Look.
This much I'll give you. I visited them once, Ruth and her husband. The place they were living in then, the way they were living. Oh, it made me glad I'm a life member. Not like Ruth. I like it in the tribe. Warm. Fuzzy. Easy.
Where was the place?
I'll break it to you on your way out. That much I'll give you. No more. I've been practically no help at all, have I, Mr. Clover? Aren't I good?
So start now the track of the marriage of Ruth and Paul Holland. Their first home, Side Street Hotel, place of transients, and of the weekly rate flashed in green neon above the sign that read, car parties arranged, share expenses, Miami, New Orleans, L.A. Inquire at desk, place of jukebox, centered in lobby bar, and casting the autumn songs and the many-colored lights on this day's transients, sipping one more for the road. Place of desk clerk who grins a lot and remembers a lot. Anyone you can mention, he remembers. Mr. and Mrs. Holland, for instance, had to be thrown out because one night they beat up on each other and were lax about the door, left it open, and this infringement of house rules made them to be thrown out. And a couple of days later, a card was received with a forwarding address for Ruth and Mr. Holland in case mail came, which never did. And, care for the card, mister? And another place, then, where Ruth Holland had lived with her husband. Tenement, near river, and be told the only reason they stayed on so long was their rent was paid a couple of months in advance once by a fella, Mooney. Everett Moon, called Mooney. Runs a place corner 12th and 3rd, Mooney's place. Then go there.
Jolly, Robert. Come back 2 hours from here. The room, the world will come to life for you.
You Everett Moon?
That's right, Robert.
Police. Danny Clover.
I'll just call you Robert, huh?
Understand you know Ruth Holland.
You really a cop, Robert? Sometimes boys put on man's clothes and play.
Yeah. Real cop. Look.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, a couple of years ago, Ruthie worked for me. Camera girl, arranged the customers, took pictures of them the way they was arranged.
She didn't make out so good, huh?
Come again, Robert?
I understand you paid 2 months' rent for her and her husband.
One night, Ruthie ran out of negatives. My best client was sobbing for a 3/4 profile. It was him or her, he said. I picked Ruthie to let go. Paul, that was her husband. He screamed at me when I did that.
Still, you paid the rent for 2 months. Why?
Liked her. Hated him.
Why?
There's a fellow who screams in your ear when his wife is dropped from a job like Ruthie was. A fellow whose wife's paycheck each week goes for him to get out of hock. A fellow who cradles his wife to sleep with the big deal he's got cooking tomorrow morning, which never happened. That's a fellow to like. You tell me, Robert.
You got a phone here?
Back at his drapes. Another thing.
What?
I read Ruthie's husband, Paul, is dead since yesterday. You see her. You tell her she can have the old work back, huh? Anytime? Now there isn't Paul anymore. Do that for me, huh, Robert?
Sergeant Tartaglia speaking.
Danny, Gino. Tell Muggavan to bring in Glenn Gilbert.
That's the fellow.
Well, I want a question again. Glenn Gilbert, Ruxton Arms Hotel. Tell Muggavan, Gino.
Got the fellow outside, Danny.
Yeah, bring him in.
Inside, Glenn. Over there. Sit down.
Thanks, Muggavan.
Anytime, Danny. My pleasure.
You know why you're here, Glenn?
I'm a boy with a college education. Remember?
Then it's easy for you to figure why you're here.
3-way cinch. Once I loved Ruth Holland. Once Ruth married someone else. Yesterday you found that someone else dead in Central Park.
You kill him, Glenn?
I found a home in Pittsburgh. I found respect in Pittsburgh. Killing a woman's husband would louse the things I've got. It's the way they are in Pittsburgh.
Why did you leave it, Glenn?
What?
Why did you leave Pittsburgh? Come here.
All the fellas in my group do it from time to time. Change of perspective, we college chums call it. Fresh outlook, fresh material.
That's why you came here?
The time has come, the tortoise said.
Yeah.
I came to find Ruth. I found her.
Old flame, old memories. For that, huh?
A girl like Ruth, they never died. You'll forgive the cliché?
Go on.
Never died. It was the approach I was going to use with her to get her back. Lovers' rock, the night football games, the gravel against a sorority window when there was a moon. That was the approach I was going to use. When I saw her, I figured I didn't need to.
Tell me about it.
I lied to you. I saw Ruth a couple of times before the time I told you about, and once after. I saw what she'd become. I figured, who needs an approach? Why waste an approach?
Go on.
I spelled it out for her. She just stared at me. And that's when I hit her. That's how she got those bruises where I hit her. Then, after
She tried to kill herself.
I'll tell you something. I wish she had. I just wish she had. She had no right to spoil something sacred.
All right, Glenn. You're under arrest.
Assault?
For now.
Yeah.
right, that stinking little piece of paper.
That's right. That's his warrant that your lawyer shrugged his shoulders about. Now I want to see your daughter.
She's in a coma. She's in shock.
Look, Mrs. Wallace, when I first came into this house, I spoke to a lawyer. I showed him this warrant. That's when he shrugged. Then I spoke to your Dr. Macklin. He said his patient was doing fine. His patient happens to be your daughter, Ruth.
This way. Ruth.
What do you want?
This man brought...
Which man? Oh. Hello, Mr. Clover. Come into my parlor. Oh, my sitting room. What did we used to call this room, Ma?
Thanks.
Thanks for saving my life, Danny. How about those people out there? You too, Ma.
That's all past, Ruth. It's over. It's done. You've made your mistakes. I've made mine. Now you're a widow. I'm a widow,
How cozy you make it. Let me hug myself to me. Oh, it's good to be home.
Sneer at it, but you'll get used to it.
What about it, Mr. Clover? Think I ought to get used to it?
No.
Neither do I. I don't approve of the joint.
Ruth, that's all past. I told you.
Now you tell me, Danny.
We've been spending a lot of time finding out about you.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a comic strip, isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it, Mother?
Stop it.
All I asked was an opinion of my life. Tragic, comic, tragic comic. An appraisal, that's what I want.
Once...
Now, there's a word. Once. That's the story of my life.
I know.
What is this? What is this? What are you talking about?
About once. For instance, when, Danny?
College.
And Glenn Gilbert?
Such a nice boy.
He really was.
He told me what happened. How he came here a few days ago. How we
remembered together?
Yes.
He wanted to remember too hard. That was his approach. But it didn't turn out any different. Poor boy.
So he beat you up.
He didn't even do that well.
Beat you up?
Yeah, Ma.
Glenn?
Yeah, Ma.
Beat you up?
Yeah, Ma.
I don't believe it.
She doesn't believe it.
But why?
She believes it. Ma, he forgot I was a married woman and tried to romance me. I said no. He slugged me. Then you know what I did?
Ruth,
Suddenly I realized what's happened to me. 6 years.
I warned you.
Oh, Ma, you're always right. Gee, Ma. Golly, Ma.
You see?
6 years. What I went through for that husband I had. From chrysanthemums in college to winking at the butcher for a quarter of a pound of meat. 6 short years. Could have made it more quickly.
Now, that's all past.
Yeah, Ma. Then my college beau slugged me. And I felt very bad. I tried to kill myself, and I didn't make it. And, Ma, you got me and brought me here. And last night I sneaked out to see a fellow. And I shot him. The fellow happened to be my husband. The fellow happened to have made me what I am today. Why should I kill me when killing him would be more clever?
Ruth.
More adult, more collegiate. You know, savoir-faire. That's French, Danny.
Let's go.
Ma. Goodbye. Au revoir. Arrivederci. Auf Wiedersehen. Adios. Various languages, Ma. Let's go, Danny.
Twilight touches Broadway now. It's quitting time. The subway hour of tired faces. Blue plate special time. But soon will be the instant when a man will dart from a doorway, beckon over his shoulder to another. Then the mob will gather and scream its heart out at the night. It's Broadway. The gaudiest. The most violent. The lonesomest mile in the world. Broadway. My beat.
Broadway-is-my beat stars Larry Thor as Detective Danny Clover, with Charles Calvert as Tartaglia and Jack Crucian as Muggavan. The program is produced and directed by Elliott Lewis, with musical score composed and conducted by Alexander Courage. In tonight's transcribed story, Jane Webb was heard as Ruth Holland and James McCallion as Glenn Gilbert. Featured in the cast were Paul Frees, Betty Lou Gerson, and Gene Howell. Broadway's My Beat moves to a new time starting next week. Join Danny Clover Friday nights on most of these same CBS radio stations. Consult your local newspaper for the time. Bill Anders speaking.
November 4th, 1953, Broadway is My Beat on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. We thank you for making us a part of your day. Would you thank this station, support their advertisers? It's their kindness and courtesy that allow us to be with you each and every time we roll around here on your favorite radio station. Now, if you miss a day, you do not have to miss a single show. All of our shows are available on demand at classicradio.stream. You can stream our shows there, learn more about classic radio collecting. You can contact me if you'd like to help us build our classic radio collection to buy new shows. You can buy me a coffee. That's where that money goes. That's at classicradio.stream, classicradio.stream. Thanks for tuning in. Tell your friends the great radio shows are right here at this spot on the dial. Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox on your favorite station.